So good evening and good morning, and welcome to Paraguay Speak. This is the first day of the fourth edition of Paraguay Speak. I am Inés Aponte. I'm a student of the Master of Learning Intervention here at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, and I'm the former president of Paraguay, of the Paraguayan Student Association. So we have 4 days of conference with very interesting topics and excellent panelists. Thank you everybody for being here today. So before start, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from where we're all gathered today and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome everyone again to the webinar on sustainable learning. This event is now live on the Paraguayan Student Association Facebook, and it's also being recorded for our YouTube channel. So don't forget to join us on social media and also on Twitter with the hashtag Paraguay Speaks and be part of the conversation. So I'm so happy to share this moment with 2 of my professors, so Jeanette and Lorraine. Hi, thank you so much for being here. So I would like to introduce you before. So Associate Professor Janet Berman is a teacher and school psychologist who has worked in Australian schools and teacher education at a number of universities, as well as a director of educational psychology at Massey University in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is okay?
Very good.
Great.
Very good.
Great. She has retired from full-time work, but she's still involved in teaching in the learning intervention team at UniMelb, supervising postgraduate research students at Melbourne University and the University of New England in regional Australia, and writing with Professor Graham. Hi, Janet. So Professor Lorraine Graham is Foundation Professor of Learning Intervention at Melbourne Graduate School of Education. So Lorraine's work is focused on the effective teaching of students with learning difficulties, inclusive practices, and teacher professional learning. She has a long-standing interest in self-regulated learning and strategy instruction. So thank you both. We can start. So anything that you can say before, that you want to say before?
Thank you for this opportunity. Inez, we are so pleased to be here and to be connected to Latin America. And we are so appreciative of having you as a student last semester.
And this semester now too.
And this semester. Oh, that's true. Yes, yeah. Very good. You are very busy.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
So let's start.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, please.
So we have some. And I'll just check, is that the right view, Lorraine?
No, Jeanette.
It's not. Okay, I beg your pardon. Stop sharing.
Yes.
Yeah. Try this instead.
Yes, indeed. That is perfect.
Better? Great. Good. Okay.
Absolutely perfect.
Well, good morning. We're going to talk to you about inclusive education and sustainable learning and the experiences we've had in Latin America with our work. We're going to also acknowledge country. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present, and note that teaching and learning has been carried on these lands for tens of thousands of years, and we're continuing in that tradition. The map we have there is the map of Australia with the Aboriginal countries on it. So it's not just one country, there are many. And the 4 people who've been involved in the project that we're sharing with you today have come from different parts of the country, from different countries. So I come from Anawan country in northern New South Wales. Lorraine?
Yes, and I come from Gubbi Gubbi country, which is on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, north of Brisbane.
And Anne and Lisa come from a different country as well. And we've also put Judy in there. Judy was involved with us the first time we went to Ecuador.
Yes.
So we acknowledge her her involvement. So the slide's saying, who are we and how do we get on this? How are we on this learning journey? Lorraine and I have been working together for decades as in teacher education with a focus on inclusive education. And this is one of the natural consequences of that wonderful working relationship that we've had.
Very grateful for that. So these ideas, we were approached by a group while we were in Melbourne. And as a result, we've had the chance to work in Ecuador primarily, but also have visited Argentina and Chile and have been across the river from Paraguay.
Our work started, I'll just go back one. Our work started with writing a book called Sustainable Learning.
Mm-hmm.
We did this, three of us together, and published it in 2015. And so all of this work has come from that. And Lorraine drove the conceptualizing of sustainable learning that has been articulated in this book, all about inclusive education.
So inclusive education is globally important. We know that it is based on the principles that we've articulated here. Inclusion is broader than inclusive education. We work in this area. There are many definitions, but I particularly like Jeanette's definition.
That inclusive education is when all children come to school and get what they need. So we reject the notion that you need to have everyone in one classroom. We reject the notion that everyone needs something the same, but we push the notion that we are community and all our children belong in our community and we need to provide what they need. And it's not inclusive education unless students are getting the teaching and realising the learning that they need. I wonder, Lorraine, if you could talk about sustainable learning a bit and how that came about.
Sustainable learning was really a response to acknowledging the importance of sustainability in general to having a future for ourselves and the children, most importantly, who will follow on. So sustainability has got so much that can be unpacked from it. It means respect for the earth, respect for resources, respect for people, and I think importantly, respect for context, everyone's context. So though we've had this opportunity to work with our ideas in Ecuador, we have always had a clear understanding that in order for anything to work and be sustainable, to last in another context, it has to be owned, adapted, and taken on by the people who live in that context, in that community. So that's where I think the idea of sustainability certainly struck us. And we have some tenets and some frameworks that we believe are more universal that we'll talk about briefly to give you an idea of what these ideas are, and also permission to take our ideas and to change and adapt them to suit the context in which you are.
Thank you, Lorraine. I missed this one, but this is showing the distinction around inclusive education, that lots of children come to school and experience barriers to their learning. And we can take the approach that we're going to give them all the same so that they will have equal teaching. But as you can see on the left-hand side in that slide, that really doesn't help everybody. The one in the middle means allocating resources differently so that some people get more resources, so it compensates them for the barriers that they are experiencing. But really, in inclusive education, what we're pushing for is to remove those barriers for everyone so that everyone has access to learning and teaching. some of our work has been linked, and Lorraine's very good at doing this, linking to the international flavours that are happening around the world. And our work is definitely linked to the Millennium Development Goal number 2, which is about universal primary education, and the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is about inclusive and equitable quality education, all really important terms, and lifelong opportunities. We've just put a couple of snapshots from the reports from the Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals there for you. We found the Spanish version, which was really handy. But I think one of the key points on that one is that the inequities in society have been really revealed by the pandemic, so that children who were already disadvantaged in terms of accessing education have become more so. And that's really a key issue for us. We want everyone to get what they need.
That's right. We conceived of sustainable learning before the Sustainable Development Goals were revealed, because we were published with this first book in 2015. So we could see that this was such an important issue that was going to be important for an extended period of time. Just as Jeanette said, it's the technological divide largely that has made a huge difference to how students are being connected to schools post-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then post-pandemic. And it varies, of course, across countries, but for everyone, there is an increased attention to also wellness and what it means to belong, to be accepted, and to be able to have the conditions to learn in a school setting.
So we've already flagged this, but this was the first book which encapsulated our definition of inclusive education as sustainable learning.
Yes.
At the time, 3 of us were connected to the University of New England, but Anne had moved to Southern Cross Uni, which is based in Coffs Harbour and Lismore on the north coast of New South Wales. I headed off over to Massey University in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Lorraine went to Melbourne Uni. So we've brought our experiences from all those contexts to this book.
Aprendizaje sostenible.
And what it means is we have 3 tenets that Lorraine flagged earlier. We're interested in learning for all, which is the basic premise of inclusive education, that everyone can learn and should be given the opportunity to learn. But we extended that and we pushed the notion that it's about learning that lasts. And this aligns with the international move towards capabilities or competencies for the 21st century, that we don't really know what sorts of workplaces the children in our schools are going to go to in 10, 20, 30 years. And we need to be able to let them go with the capabilities that they need to be able to adapt to whatever happens in work for them in the future and in the world. So that's our second tenet. At the third tenet, we talked about learning that matters. This came from the idea that often in casework with young children who have significant disabilities, we need to make priorities, set priorities for their learning, that we are not going to have them learn everything that's in the curriculum, but we're going to have them learn the important things for them in their context. However, as we kept talking, we realised that it wasn't the learning that matters, that was the third key. It was actually teaching that matters. So it is the teaching which results in learning that is really important. And that's where we've taken this whole idea.
Yes.
One of the key frameworks we use is a whole person or a complete person. We're not just looking at academic learning. We see learners and teachers as cultural, physical, cognitive, interpersonal and intrapersonal. Looks like we've got a mix of language there. But this represents 5 dimensions of humans as they grow and learn, and we've taken that as a core aspect of our work. This is part of a painting that I acquired while I was in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it gives the sense of the unfurling or the growing person. As we learn, we unfurl and we become ourselves, become our full selves. Traditionally, inclusive education is about including children, students who have disabilities. We interrogated this idea and talked about labels or disabilities coming from medical science, and some of them do, from psychological science, and psychological science is pretty good at creating groups of symptoms or behaviours that become a syndrome or a label that we will then use in schools. But the other categorizing that we do in education is to do with social and cultural descriptions, and they're really, really important as well. We unpack these in terms of atrium capabilities, and it's one of our core aspects. Lorraine, would you like to?
I would like to. So the idea of an atrium in English, it comes from an entrance that's flooded with light. It's actually originally a Roman word, atrium. And for us, it's a powerful metaphor for looking at what a student can do. So a strengths-based idea, and looking at the capabilities. And for us, in English, our acronym is close to atrium. And we also like this as a metaphor. And we know that Spanish is a very metaphorical sort of language as well, where the language brings much more meaning. So we love this idea of the atrium because that's how the light gets in. And as a teacher, you're looking for strengths to build on. As a teacher, you're also looking for ways to understand profiles of students' learning. And we think about it as being the handle, any particular label that might accompany a student's profile, such as ADHD, autism, intellectual disability. It's just the handle on the door. You don't know everything about that student from the label. It just gives you a bit of an idea about which room to look at in order to see how you might respond. So the capacities that we talk about, that we want to look at in looking at students' strengths and weaknesses, include active learning, because we want our learners to be independent. That's always the goal: independence, lifelong learning. We also know how important it is to know how students' cognitive processing and how they interact with information, their thinking, how they relate to others. That is so important. It's important in the classroom, it's important in life, it's important in work. Also, how students use the tools of learning, which is literacy, numeracy, and symbol systems in general. How their capacities are and how well equipped they are to be able to use these cognitive tools to learn and to continue to learn throughout their lives. It's also important to articulate how important it is that students are able to manage themselves, this idea of self-regulation, so that they are in charge of their own ability to know when they need a break, know when they need some assistance, be able to ask for help. All of these sorts of ways of looking at students' experiences and what helps and hinders their learning are particularly important to the way that we think about sustainable learning, and how we have been talking about with teachers and with other professionals ways for them to also consider their students' strengths and weaknesses.
And we have tried to map the capabilities to the types of characteristics or the areas of specific skills that teachers talk about all the time. So for each of those, we've just included a list of the types of skills that maybe a psychologist might write about when they're giving a report, or a speech pathologist might write about when they give a report about a student's learning, and map those to the Atrium capabilities. Changing Atrium to Atrio was a collaborative experience. We deconstructed Atrium the way Lorraine and Anne and I saw it, and our South American colleagues put it back together again as Atrio, and it worked, which was wonderful. And if I just take you back to this slide, we've got a collection of photographs of Atrium around the world, and we found this one online, and then on our very last day in Ecuador we managed to find where it was, so we could take our own photographs of this beautiful atrium. So that's our symbol for Atrio in Ecuador. So we focus on capabilities of learners, but we also focus on influences on learning. So you'll have to put your English literacy hat on at the moment to read this slide. Everything we do in teaching and learning happens within layers of influence. There are lots of influences that affect how we engage in learning and how we use our Atrium capabilities with each other. So how students as learners will tap into their capabilities to have relationships with teachers and to be able to use the tools of learning, which are language and literacy and numeracy and other symbols. So that's the approach we take. One of the authors who we tapped into when we were doing this conceptualizing was Stephen Sterling, and he talks about how important an ecological view of learning is. And we represented it with a Bronfenbrenner type graphic with the capabilities of learners in the middle, represented by the five-sided figure, and then the layers of influence within which they are using those capabilities. When we had an amazing team of graphic artists who worked with us on our work in Ecuador, and they took that idea and developed it into the graphic on the right. But when we used that graphic, we realized it really didn't represent how people in Ecuador saw influences on learning. It's got really strong boundaries between these layers, and the teachers that we worked with didn't see boundaries between these layers at all. They saw them as all merging, all coming together. So even though it's a beautiful graphic, it doesn't actually represent what we needed to talk about. So that was really interesting for us.
Well, it's a feature of context again, which we really respect.
Yeah. The next framework in our work is the responsive teaching framework. So the three of us who had 90 years teaching experience tapped into what it was we did. So we grounded our theory really in what we did as professional teachers, and came up with this notion of responsive teaching. There's a real push from us to know the students. If you don't know about your students, you can't respond in the way that might be most appropriate for them. So we have focused on this notion of responsive teaching, and it resonated for the people with whom we worked in Ecuador. And this is the beginning of the model.
Yes.
So it has 3 phases. And within those phases, we broke it down to 8 questions that we ask ourselves whenever we are taking on any teaching. The first one is, what frameworks do we work within? So what are those influences that come down and affect how we act as teachers and how our students act as learners? The second one is, what do I bring as a teacher?
Mm.
This came into really clear focus for me as a European or a Pākehā in New Zealand. So every time I front a classroom, every time I teach, I bring my colonising culture with me. And I am seen to be part of the colonising part of society. And I need to understand what that means for children who are part of the involuntary minority that has been created by European colonisation. And we discovered this was very similar in Ecuador. So that resonated also. The third one is about what our students bring as learners. And please, Lorraine, cut in whenever you would like to.
I think we just need light touch here. So
okay,
I'm happy to have you just go through them, Jeanette.
All right. The next one is, what do I need to teach now? So what are the priorities? And this is really important to decide what you're going to focus on. We can't do everything. Most teachers have a very short period with students, a year. And in that period, they need to focus on what they see as most important and what they've negotiated as being most important with the student and with their family. And then we go into, how do we teach? So how do we teach for all our learners, for all those amazing different people who come in to our teaching? And we use a basis of universal design for learning and what we call responsive differentiation, so that as you get to know students, you will be able to respond more effectively to their needs. Then we look at what the students have learned. So that's step 6. 7 is about what feedback is working for them. So what sorts of feedback do I need to give that will help future learning? And the next one is about, how effective was my teaching? What about it worked? What didn't work? And what will I do next? So that's our responsive teaching framework. And we've unpacked that quite a lot. And focused on it.
Particularly recently, Jeanette. Yes. Oh, goodness, look at this beautiful graphic that, again, we co-constructed or rather just were a part of the translation in more ways than one, looking at the major themes of the Ecuadorian curriculum about justice, innovation, and solidarity or bringing things together. So it was, again, just a privilege to be working with our collaborators.
Yeah.
You can see the ecological influence, of course, so important. And that's particularly important in Ecuador, because I know that they were amongst the first to acknowledge the environment as a constitutional body within their governance with a voice.
So there are our frameworks, and as we've said, they resonate with South America as we were preparing to take our work there. And this is what we did while we were there.
Yay. It was a wonderful experience.
And that's just a summary of the key ideas that we took there, but we might just have a look at the photos without the words over the top. In the top left is the team who delivered the first week of teaching for practicing teachers. So these were already experienced teachers, and we provided a week's learning for them. You can see on the top right, they had great fun. Not only did we play games like Snowball, where you write a concept on a piece of paper, screw it up, throw it, and someone else picks it up and reads it and works out what it's about. But Lisa, who is an associate professor also at MGSE, had everybody in the room singing an Aboriginal song.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really us sharing our culture, and they shared their culture with us enormously too. It's the first time we'd worked as a team with direct translation, and that was a whole new learning experience for us. And we were blown away by the skills of people who are who translate while we're speaking. And one of the best we had was a person who had been a classroom teacher. So he came with his understandings of classroom teaching, and that meant that any particular words we used, he was able to put the nuance of education around them. Amazing, incredible.
Absolutely so.
Is there anything else from that one, Lorraine?
I think 2018 and 2019 was when this took place.
Yep.
2020, we were ready to go to Peru with the same group, looking at sustainable learning, but of course, pandemic. And so a lot of the ideas that we've subsequently been working with Alata on are now online.
Yeah.
And offered quite broadly within Latin America.
That's just a few more pictures from that first experience. One of the things that we found really difficult was that we really didn't have any experience of teaching and learning in Ecuador. And as responsive teachers, we needed to find out more about that, because we were not confident that what we were bringing would actually work. One way we did that was visit a number of schools, and that was one of the schools in Quito that we visited, which was wonderful, a beautiful place. Sitting in on classes, we could feel the resonance there. We are talking about the same thing. We are talking about relationships between teachers and students. We are talking about a diversity of learners. We're talking about a range of teaching, and we felt much more confident and comfortable with what we were doing after that. It's just another picture with some teachers at one of the schools.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, they're very busy, lots of work. Lots of work. It was fantastic.
It really was.
Yeah. And the people with whom we worked shared their cultures with us as well. And they honoured us with a amazing performance that had costumes from all the way through Ecuadorian history. It was really, really special.
Yeah, absolutely it was. We even took our dean.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
So, well, if in the very far left bottom, there's a picture of Jim Waterston, who is the Dean of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. And he had just taken up his post. And so to give him a flavour of what we were actually doing, then he accompanied us to this particular occasion when we were working in Quito. And it was with teachers from the Amazon and from the Sierras. So, yeah.
Yeah. We also did some workshops with people who do educational casework. So
Right.
special educators, psychologists, speech therapists, occupational therapists. And that was a real privilege also, because we had translated some of our work from classroom teaching to educational casework or learning intervention, which is where we're working at the moment. The group with whom we worked were very good with social media, so there were lots of postings about what was happening. I just want to move on because I'm conscious of the time, but
sure.
we had some data from those workshops as well. So Lorraine, would you like to lead us through these?
Certainly. I'll just speak very briefly.
Oh, can you see them?
Yes, we can see them. They're clear as a bell. This just indicates the scope of the the work in Ecuador, it was supported by the Ministry of Education, and it really was quite extensive. So you can see 251 advanced teachers did the first course, and you can see how much was face-to-face, and then there was online and further ways to support the learning, because we know that in order to make some change, it can't just be a one-off workshop. We sort of got people excited about the ideas and introduced to them, but then there was a considerable online component to work with these ideas further. This is just better pedagogy with relation to sustainability, really. So the next one, as well as the tutors, although they were advanced teachers, there were also these teachers in the first cohort then went and worked with groups of about 20 to 25 teachers themselves. And that is how the scope of the 5,500 teachers being touched by these ideas came into being. And again, it was a blended model. And it also included expert groups. So these expert groups tended to be professionals, such as speech pathologists, which I know, Inez, is your professional background, educational psychologists, others who were in leadership positions within schools. And so there was a separate training program for them, which also had sort of like higher level management of groups, and they were responsible for checking the learning of the other participants in the teacher training and tutor programs. So all of that, you can see, was quite well organised, and it occurred in the whole coastal region of Ecuador in the first instance, and then moved to the mountains and the Amazonian area. So you can see this again, it's the blend of face-to-face and hours online. We did a certain proportion of the face-to-face, but then the tutors and the experts took over that role. So it was a supported program with considerable input from the Ministry of Education and lots of work from ALATA, our partners.
And we had a constant push that we would not be always the people providing the stimulus, and that this needed to be taken and moulded to suit the context and managed by local people, not by us.
Exactly.
So that was one of our pushes.
Yes,
yeah, go on, Lorraine.
These are just some examples of the learning groups that were set up. That's all I wanted to say, Jeanette, please.
And in the bottom right posting is Claudia, who has been working with us from the beginning. She was employed by ALATA, and she's now a doctoral student at Melbourne University. She was amazing in how she could take our ideas and make meaning out of them to put into a South American context. It was just incredible. Yeah, amazing person. There are some current postings as well, so not just the historical ones. And this nano course, or a NUC, is operating, and people are able to sign up for that. It uses the same ideas.
It does. And we know from ALATA that currently in excess of 800 people have completed the NUC.
Some universities have taken on the ideas as well. There were at the presentations, there were invited guests from universities, and this has been taken on by a number of different universities. And if you go searching for Aprendizaje Sostenible, you will find lots of teacher-created resources and ways of thinking about the ideas that we took to South America. So that's really exciting. This one here is being responsive to the pandemic and how lots of learning has become virtual or online. And this is one of the responses of Alata to that situation.
We were even still connected in 2020 through a live, something similar to what we're doing today, back to the Catholic University of Quito. So the team again presented some of the ideas in advance of them taking the ideas further at that university. I think Alata's been very creative and also responsive, as we would want, Jeanette, in terms of using the ideas which we openly support. Anything that can be of use in the general push towards more inclusive education is a wonderful contribution from our point of view. So yes, indeed. So we've been very supportive of their thinking, and they've been creative in their responses. And how wonderful. Oh, yes.
Go on.
I will. Okay, well, it's just a fabulous slide to almost finish on. And that is, if you recall from the very beginning, we were very conscious of coming and being invited into Ecuador, into the context of the country, to provide frameworks that come from our experience here in Australia. And our goal always was to provide opportunities for ownership to people that we were working with, who we were working with, and to other universities and other academics. And this has created an opportunity for our collaborator, Claudia Pulido, to receive a scholarship from the Colombian government to enroll in a doctoral program at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. And Claudia's begun. This is the second semester of her enrolment, and the topic that she will be investigating is there on the screen. It's about the translation that teachers do of their professional learning into inclusive practice. So we're just delighted that this is one of the outcomes from our work in Latin America. And we just look forward to what Claudia will do, and also keeping in touch with Alata and other connections we've made as the pandemic changes, and perhaps there are more opportunities for us to again be involved in person in Latin America into the future. Jeanette?
So where to now for sustainable learning? We've written 2 books. One of them's getting a little bit old now, but it has been taken on at Melbourne University and is the text for a course called The Student as Learner, because we push the idea that we need to understand our students as learners in order to be able to respond to them. So that's been quite a successful subject, and it's probably time we wrote a second edition of that, which is the yellow one on the far right. But at the moment, we're writing responsive teaching for sustainable learning, which is based on the teaching that we did in Ecuador. We taught for a week, and the 4 of us brought our own teaching experiences and strategies and used those. And now we're trying to capture that in a book so that it might be available for other people. And the second one there, learning intervention, is the same set of ideas, but for school psychologists like me, speechies, OTs, special educators, anyone who does casework that looks at student learning.
Yes.
So that's where we are, but we're going to end with this one.
Oh, my goodness, the hummingbirds in Ecuador were just important to us. Oh, dearie me. When we visited the school that Jeanette talked about earlier, it was so evident that the environment was not a very resource-rich environment, but there was such care in building gardens for the hummingbirds. And we were lucky enough to see some.
Yep.
And this is a photo of one.
Yep.
And it led to just trying to, again, think about how us being in Latin America with our ideas made sense. And so there is an Aesop's fable, which has all of these woodland creatures sort of saying, how are we going to put out this fire? This fire is affecting our environment. And they all run away, except the hummingbird. And the hummingbird, with its tiny little beak, it gets tiny drops of water and flies tirelessly trying to put out the fire. And the moral of the story is, little by little, we get there, little by little. So it seems sometimes that there are obstacles and barriers that it will take a long time to remove, but it becomes so much easier when we share ideas, frameworks, plans for the future, and energy towards really good causes and really important ways of acting that will change the world for the better, particularly for our children. So I would say that that is what definitely powers our work, Jeanette, together and with our colleagues. And it has just been an absolute pleasure to be able to share as part of Paraguay Speaks this morning, some of the frameworks and some of the experiences that we've had the privilege to enjoy.
Here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to stop sharing now.
And I can see that there's something in the chat.
Yes, we have questions and some comments in the chat.
Indeed.
So, thank you for the presentation. Everything is so inspiring and clear. Can you further explain how to address the difference between allocating resources versus removing barriers with an example?
It's a very good question. I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to battle the bureaucracy of allocating extra resources to some students who've been identified with special or additional needs. Schools would be well enough resourced so that they could make decisions on the ground about how best to support people. There are major problems with, for example, the approach in the UK, where a third of the staff in education are teaching assistants. They're not teachers. Now, for me, I think that's really wrong. We're watering down the expertise and the professionalism that can make a difference for students. And the students for whom they provide teacher aides or teacher assistants are the students who desperately need good teaching. They don't need minding, they need good teaching. So there are lots of complexities in resourcing. Breaking down barriers we can do often without resources. In the picture we showed you, it was just changing the shape of the sort of fence that was there. So we can do lots of things on the ground in classrooms and schools that don't need additional resourcing. It takes a mindset, a way of thinking about it, rather than extra money. Of course, at the moment, teachers do need extra money because their pay has gone down over the last number of years, but that's a different issue. Lorraine.
Fabulous question. Resourcing is always an issue with inclusive education. And as Jeanette says, if the resourcing is available more broadly, it can be used creatively so that it actually addresses the needs of all of the students, which might be in common to those needs that the student who might have targeted funding attached to their condition actually requires. So it's the way of thinking about grouping. It's the way of thinking about using teachers' time plus teacher aides' time. It's a way of thinking about peer support from students within the classroom. It's also a way of principles and leadership. The leadership that's required for inclusive schools is it's almost of a different type. And I know that that's one of our challenges in the next little while, Jeanette, is to really bring our framework to the idea of leadership. But you can't really think of school leadership in this day and age without it being inclusive. Schools should reflect their community and they should be welcoming. There's legislation throughout there's different layers of UN right through national, etc., which enshrines the right to inclusive education for people. And so it's our job to do it. One of the layers is through quality education and quality teaching. That is indeed important, but there are other moves that could be made. Some of them are just tweaks that make a big difference. Others require more resourcing, not just from the school level, but from the system level and globally.
Thank you so much. I think it's more than clear. But yeah, we need to still keep talking and thinking about this. And
Yes.
yeah. So we have another question here. Mercedes says, thanks for highlighting the issue of the continuity of colonization in education. This drew my attention to Aboriginal communities. What examples can we consider to make teaching a participatory and representative process? Perhaps we can connect this with some initiatives in Australia.
As I mentioned earlier, this really became front of my consciousness in New Zealand. And coming back to Australia, we are quite a long way behind progress for reconciling the colonisation that happened and is continuing to happen through education. And I think before I went, I was probably culturally blind. I actually thought that I would go to New Zealand and it would be fine because the culture would be the same, but it is absolutely totally different. And I had to learn from the ground up the cultural expectations that were there. Same thing happens in a classroom. Most of us go in just expecting that we are the culture and everyone else can fit in. But we need to turn that on its head so that teachers are conscious of what they take with them into the classroom. I know some of that is happening in Aboriginal communities, and I know there's a push to have more and more Aboriginal people become the teachers in their communities. And Lorraine and I have worked with some outstanding Aboriginal teachers and principals who are wonderful models for that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that could happen, that could change.
And I have some examples just from the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, because I know this context best, so I can give you some examples from what we're doing. Currently, in the rethinking of the initial teacher education program, we have a compulsory Indigenous education unit, which really highlights many of the issues and does it in a more straightforward way than I have experienced in tertiary institutions, which Jeanette and I have been working in since the 90s. Yep, before many of you were born, probably. But anyway, I see that as a real positive. And there is another program that is, again, being led through leadership at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. And the leadership comes from our Assistant Dean, Indigenous, and she is a Kamilaroi woman from the South Burnett, originally in Queensland. And she is leading a curriculum reform project, which is, it's taking Indigenous knowledges, particularly around key environmental issues, including knowledges about astronomy and how to manage the land and the seas. And it is linking these ideas to the Australian curriculum with the view that every state and territory will be influenced by this particular curriculum reform project. So I can see that it's a little by little situation, but there's some light.
It is indeed. We have another question. Would you mind sharing how ALATA work in Ecuador? Meaning what sort of connections were made so that Paraguayan educators can consider further opportunities?
Oh, how fabulous. Okay, so ALATA, which stands for the Australia Latin America Training Academy, but they've now rebranded to as ALATA Inclusion. They have offices here in, well, I'm not in Melbourne at the moment. They have offices in Melbourne and they have offices in Quito and Guayaquil. So I guess the initial approach was because they had this ministry contract and they wanted to find some ways of freshly approaching the task that was given. So that's when they approached us at MGSE. I think they have significant connections across Latin America, particularly with, there's a network of universities, and one of them is called UTPL out of Loja. There's another one now, I think it's Salinas, and also there are connections which they have now reaching up to Mexico. So I sort of know a lot of vague details about ALATA, but Inez, I can provide you with some of that information without exactly how to contact them, that you can share with interested people. So I can do that as a follow-up. Is that okay?
That would be perfect. Thank you so much. I'm very interested in that, actually.
Okay, yes, I think they'd be interested in speaking with you as well.
Yeah, totally. So thank you so much. We have a comment here. Thank you so much for such a beautiful work. For whom we think about the possibility of having a early childhood, and this is a very clear and applicable guide, and that gives you a hope and a lot of joy. So yeah, that was a comment of one people. And another question. I think this is going to be the last question because we ran out of time. Yeah. So this is the last question. The rural area of Paraguay is characterized by geographical dispersion and multi-levels, where different students of different ages attend in the same physical space. What is Australia's experience dealing with geographical dispersion and adapting education to the community?
That's a good question. I'm going to jump in. A lot of my work has been as a school psychologist around New South Wales in 1 and 2 teacher schools. So they do inclusion better than anyone. When a child is born into and grows up as a toddler and at preschool and at school as a part of the community and the school manage to do it really well. It's when a child comes into a school and they're not known, that's when you get barriers pop up straight away. People's fear of the unknown or concerns about whether they're actually going to be able to cater for this person. So yeah, little places do it really well because they have to.
And I can speak a little bit from the more systemic view. So Australia is a high performing but low equity country in terms of our education system, which means that the metropolitan areas are much more advantaged than our regional and remote. And this does relate to our Indigenous population. And it also relates to the different resourcing requirements. And often it's not the physical resourcing, it's the people resourcing and the length of time that people stay in remote teaching positions. That kind of lack of continuity makes a difference to the quality of education. We have acknowledged these issues to do with equity and distance for decades in Australia, and we have had national centres. We have had various ways of trying to address these difficulties, including targeting teacher graduates before they graduate to actually teach in more remote areas. All of these ways of trying to address the difficulties have not had a lot of impact, but we have to keep working on it. It is a real issue within Australian education that we again share with Paraguay.
And it's actually, we're one of the worst in terms of inequity in the world. And part of that is the government funding for private schools, which are mostly in cities. So it just exacerbates that whole issue as well.
And again, it's historical. It's historical. We have a Catholic system, an independent system, and a state system. And the state system shares resources with the other two sectors. And really, it ends up being, as we said, a low equity system of education, unfortunately, and almost intractably, but hopefully not forever. We've got a new government here, so that gives us a bit of hope, doesn't it? It does. I mean, so yes, and we continue to do what we can, but acknowledge the reality.
Well, thank you so much to the audience for the questions, and thank you so much to you, Jeanette and Lorraine. This was amazing. I'm very happy and I'm very happy. I just can't find enough words to say how happy I am to share this with you. And may see you tomorrow, right?
Yes, we will see you tomorrow. We're extremely happy about this too. It's been amazing, our work there. So fantastic.
You did an amazing work, and we definitely will definitely we need to keep talking about this. And maybe we can do something in Paraguay. Why not, right?
Exactly. And really, if you do Google like Alata, you'll come up with something that will be sort of in the ballpark. So, but I'll give you the exact contact that we have.
Please.
All right. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you. As always, Jeanette, it's just so wonderful to work with you. And Inez, you're a force to be reckoned with. All the best for your future, sincerely. And, thank you everyone for joining us on your Sunday night.
Yes, thank you.
So I just want to remind you, everybody, that you can rewatch this session on Facebook and also on the YouTube channel. And we're looking forward to see you tomorrow. We have another session, another webinar about that diplomatic relations about Paraguay and Australia, and about a very interesting book that is Australia Forgotten Soldiers from Paraguay. So great sessions today. You are more than invited, Janelle and Lorraine. I will send you the link.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. See you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.